Welcome to the Real Talk Cyber Podcast. The topic for today was selected by Joe Waide, and what we're going to be focusing on today is why do most cybersecurity companies fail, or why do most companies fail when it comes to their cyber programs? And so, Joe, was there something that had you pick this topic? What made you bring this up to the guys today?
Well, I think the biggest thing, when we think about it from a continuity perspective, right, and why organizations sort of see cybersecurity as more of an expense than it is, something to consider in terms of ROI, is because it's sort of a, hey, well, we implemented all these things, right, and we got all these tools, but the continuity and the enforcement behind their cybersecurity practices doesn't typically remain, right? It sort of stalls out for various reasons, and those are reasons we're obviously going to get into today. But from a cybersecurity practitioner's perspective, you want to see continuity in that cybersecurity practice, right? And I think if we can give some of our listeners some background on that, that would be extremely beneficial to sort of breach the topic of, hey, we purchase all these things, right? We've educated our employees, but we just don't feel like we're meeting, either regulatory standards or cybersecurity standards. So
yeah, I think that a lot of times, especially with compliance, all of a sudden you start to see teams in this position where they're actually putting in place cybersecurity solutions. Go figure, before it was kind of just very reactive, but like compliance kind of forces you to be in this new state of, hey, we got to go create some cybersecurity protection. And I think it's very interesting because it's very easy to get caught in the trap of like, hey, let's just do these compliance action items, which is ironic that sometimes that can be not necessarily best practices with cybersecurity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Want to start with maybe like, what does it even mean? Like, how do I know if I'm a leader? Because you go to any leader and you say, hey, how are you doing with your cybersecurity program? They're like, Joe, this is the best cybersecurity program we got. I mean, we got a limited budget, but I know what I'm doing. Talk to kind of like all those individuals out there who may think they know what they're doing, but aren't. Like, how do you know if your cybersecurity program is failing? I mean, Des, actually, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that there's a few ways that you can know if your program is failing. And most typically go through a phased approach of how they get there, and then we could kind of hit, I would like to hit that part first, right? What's the phased approach? Because most people see, or most security leaders and practitioners say, obviously the ultimate failure is what? The breach. The breach is the ultimate failure theoretically, right? You get compromised in some way, shape, or form, and now you're responding to the attack. So that's one of the most common things that people are going to look at when they are assessing what a failure looks like. Now, I do think that phased approach is, we started off, we have some level of false confidence. We think that we're good, right? If you didn't think that you were good, you typically wouldn't be going through the process to kind of work through all these things in general, right? That's just not a thing that you would be doing. So with that being said, you start off there, then you go from there and you start to see a breakdown of your tooling, you start to see a breakdown of your system, right? Meaning you start to see the same things happen over and over again. This is a sign of a failing program, right? I have the same incidents happening similar ways over and over and over and over and over again. That's a failing program. Then we have a material breach, something that's really, really bad. Then we fall into now we lose trust of our customers because now we've been breaching, now we have to report this out, right? That's like the phased approach, more or less. There are always signs that lead you to that point, though. Some of the larger signs, I would say, is, number one, you have a failure in governance and leadership. Right then and there. That's one of the easiest failures. You don't have anything at the strategic level that's setting up. You don't understand, where all of your high-value assets are. You don't have buy-in at the senior level. You don't have appropriate budget. You don't have the org structure set up appropriately to set yourself up for success. That's typically one of the first failures or signs of failure. Then you have let's say a failing, more or less, identity access management program too. because a lot of these programs from a cybersecurity perspective are made up of other things underneath it, right? So you start to see that break down there when it comes down to access. Access is one of the easiest things that you could tell. If you don't do access well, the odds of you doing everything else well are very, very, very low. One of the bigger ones, though, is operational breakdown, where cybersecurity is not conjoined to your business processes and to your technology workflows. If cybersecurity is an add-on feature of everything you're doing, your program is probably failing, right? And so that, with a lot of other things, I could go on and on and on about signs of it, but those are the things right there when you kind of look at the phased approach of what you go through. And then when you start thinking about some of the red flags or the tails of what it looks like, we could definitely start to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it, top down, 100%. Kind of just to tag on to that, something that you had mentioned too was sort of the operational failure, right? And I think a clear-cut way to view this, or if this is something that you're trying to decide for yourself or your organization, if your users, or if you're making decisions based on your user behavior, right, and what's going to work easiest for them, if you're making decisions on whether or not you think your users are going to, click on phishing links or override controls, then you don't have a cybersecurity program, flat out, right? We can't make our decisions based on what's going to play the best for the users, right? Obviously, usability and workflow and efficiency should be top of mind from a business perspective. But if we're thinking about a cybersecurity program, which should align with the business perspective, that culture should be built around security best practice, right? Thinking about the biggest attack vector or the biggest threat to most organizations is user behavior, right? It's not just fake stats saying that most breaches, most compromise comes from user behavior. No, that's real, right? And if we're making decisions based off of that, how the users are going to play easier in the sandbox, you don't have a cybersecurity program currently going on, right?
What would you guys say? I mean, there's probably millions of indicators that someone doesn't have an effective cybersecurity program. What are there maybe 2 or 3 core areas where, hey, these are probably the most likely indicators that you need to revisit your cybersecurity program?
Yeah, if you're dusting off your policies and procedures, if you go to a consultant and they're like, hey, so what are we doing from a governance perspective? Let's take a look at those policies and procedures. Oh, well, we wrote them 3 years ago. We haven't really gone back to them. That's a clear indicator, right? Because that means that there's no enforcement top down. Everything in those policies should set forth practices, right? And those things need to be upheld. If we're talking 2023 is the last time that you reviewed those, clear-cut indicator. Dad, you got another one?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to come at this a slightly different. Being an internal leader at companies, I would say look at your security team itself, look at your practitioners. Few things, and these are intangibles. If the security leadership team is afraid that security is being seen as a blocker, you are probably right. You have a failing program right then and there. If your security team is burned out, that means they're fighting fires and they're not actually being predictive. That is also a sign of it as well. If you have engineering teams or teams, business practitioners as well, who want to bypass your security controls so that they can move faster, that means it's not engineered into the actual process, not engineered into your technology stack appropriately, you probably have a failing program. And if no one trusts security's guidance and that people leave you intentionally off conversations, then you likely have a failing program. Those are just things that are intangibles typically. And when I go into an environment and I see it, and I'll be honest with you, in most of those environments, leaders in their minds are under the impression that they are doing very, very well. You know what I mean? They are under the impression that, hey, things are going good. But when you start stacking those things up, it's likely that you have a lot of additional drift and a lot of additional struggles in your actual program, right? Another true sign of that too, I would say too, is when you start looking at how other people outside of or around the organization in general, when you start looking at how they want to solve issues from a security perspective, or if it's even top of mind at all, is it something they even think about? And that goes down to the junior analyst that's work in finance, all the way up to the CFO, right? If no one is security minded at all, that means you don't have anything bleeding into the culture whatsoever. People see you as an isolated function, right? An additional thing is too, org structure matters. Org structure matters. It's funny because when you go on LinkedIn, you see everyone says the CISO should report to the board, the CISO should report to the CEO, all of these additional things, right? And everyone has all these perspectives on org structures and security, right? Now, here's where the bigger issues are in my mind when we start thinking about those things. If you do see security and it's under a guy that's under another guy that's under another guy, and that's where you start with security, or someone has that owns security, owns 5 tasks, then yes, you probably have a failing program, right? And I think that we got to get to the point where we start to treat security as any other business vertical in the organization. Historically, security leaders have not done a good job at that. And I mean, like, your top level executives, they don't do a good job at it. They don't treat it like a business vertical, so the business doesn't treat it like a vertical, right? You're not looking at any type of metrics. You aren't, looking at return on investment. You're not thinking about security from a business perspective and how it actually impacts the things that we're talking about, right? And so those things create issues in and of themselves, and it makes things super duper difficult in the environment for people to navigate. And to Joe's point, policies become obsolete in that regard because no one wants to enforce a policy because no one wants to see it through, because security doesn't have the authority, because security doesn't operate as a true business vertical. It's an add-on thing that we have to do from a compliance perspective. And that's where we want to get it out of.
I'm going to probably take like a more like macro perspective here just in general, because I think this one fundamental I think most people don't have in all leadership roles, which is I think most people don't have a clear outcome that they're trying to target for the next 3 years, and as a result they don't have a clear strategy. And I would argue that anyone who's in corporate, in any role, in finance, in operations, in sales, if you don't have one clear, well-articulated outcome that you're targeting for the next 3 years and a strategy to accomplish that outcome, then you're failing. and in many senses, there has to be some transparency created from up top. But I think that from my perspective, that's one of the key things. So when looking at
not to cut you off though, but you just hit a very, very important point. I've been in programs where I've asked leaders if they had a 3 to 5 year plan and they don't have it. And yeah, I know the company has a 3 to 5 year plan.
Right.
So just imagine that, right? You sit there as a executive leader who wants to report to a CEO, who wants to report to a board, who wants to be taken serious, and you don't have a 3 to 5 year plan of where we are going whatsoever. There is no strategic vision in that. And so when we start thinking about it, it goes back to the first phase that we talked about earlier, which is when you start talking about governance and strategy. And I think that might be, of all the things we're talking about, the biggest sign that a program is failing, if there is no strategic vision.
And Joe, chime in here too, but part of me thinks that one of the core criteria for any cybersecurity leader is they need to, if they want to be successful personally and professionally, they need to be in an environment that is going to endorse that. And Absolutely. So there's probably a lot of IT leaders that are sitting in these organizations where there is no clear roadmap, there is no clear vision from up top. And they're kind of surviving just like how everyone in the entire organization is surviving. And so in many senses, my personal perspective is when looking at, hey, is my cybersecurity program effective? I think a lot of people are going to have to ask themselves the question of, hey, can I accomplish that within my organization? Or is my organization going to limit my growth?
Right, and to that point, we see a lot of times that the organization is taking the latter approach, right, limiting the growth. Kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, where a lot of CEOs and leadership across the organizations that we deal with see cybersecurity as primarily an expense, right? It's not baked into the culture of the organization. The amount of conversations that I have on a weekly basis talking to IT and security leaders, that when you ask them questions like, is it feasible to get this accomplished within the organization? Is it feasible to get these policies approved? We spent so much time developing this governance, and this governance aligns with how we need to implement this for you to be not only secure but compliant. And a lot of the times the answer is, I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
We're going to have a few meetings about this. I don't know if the users are going to adhere to this. I don't know if the leadership is going to endorse the users having to comply with this governance. And it's stressful for them, right? And I get it. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of our job as consultants is, having to hear that, hey, all this work that you're putting in to trying to push forward and create a good cybersecurity program, one that stands up against compliance and threats, right, might not necessarily be bought in by the leadership. And that's something that happens more often than you think.
It's like picking your team, man. If you're going to be on a crappy team, and you're an A player, you're not going to be successful. So you might as well, LeBron James it and hit the Miami Heat or something else, because
right.
You're not being set up for success.
Or let's go even further, right? Like, if we're sitting back, and this is where, and I get it, our perspective is if the organization isn't looking at it that way, then obviously that's going to create a challenge. That is 100% true. Now, I think that when we're thinking about our listeners, right, and we're thinking about everyone that's going to sit in those seats, my challenge is you still need to create it either way. And you have to, if you're going to be internal to an organization, you are either going to be a manager or you are going to be a changer. And if you are going to be a change agent in that organization, then you need to create it. You need to create the 3 to 5 year game plan, irrespective of that. You need to go to your senior leadership team and say, hey, if we don't have this, hey, I'm trying to understand the vision because I'm trying to build my department so that we can do that. This is what we're trying to do. And from there, that should spur the conversation, and it should spur potential maturity across the entire organization, because now everyone has to start thinking like that, right? And ultimately, if they don't, you've done your job, because you're going to have to create a vision on what that end state looks like for you and for your team, right? Yeah. So even if you're not set up for success, at a certain point in time, going back to the analogy, sometimes, man, you're going to have to grab it off the glass and you're going to have to make something happen. Like, you're going to have to do it yourself, and you're going to have to take that level of extreme ownership of actually developing like a strategy and actually developing operational and tactical level, outcomes that's going to lead to your overall strategic goal and strategic vision, right? And it's easier said than done. It comes with a lot of politics that you obviously have to overcome too. Nevertheless, as you continue to work through those things, it opens up that opportunity for you to actually drive things through the way that you need to. And that, to me, is necessary for you to get out of, watching program after program after program fail. And again, failing in security isn't just a breach. It's not just that worst outcome, right? Failing is when you set yourself up to hit a strategic level outcome or vision, right? And then you're ultimately not able to achieve that, and you set yourself up for additional failures in the future because now no one actually sees you as being the enabler in the environment. And instead, culturally, you're viewed as being something as an add-on or something that even retracts us or as a blocker from us achieving our goal and vision.
Okay. Well, let's move on, guys. So, at the end of the day, just to conclude that point, I think, at the end of when you're an IT leader, like you do have an opportunity to not just be a leader in your department, but a leader throughout the entire organization. When you don't have that clarity, you have an opportunity to step up and show what it looks like and encourage the company to have clarity. And at the end of the day, when the leader of the company sees that, you want a promotion. I mean, you're talking at a whole new level because they're like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. He knows how to handle things, and he's not just creating clarity for his department, but for the entire organization. So, moving on, in a situation where things are failing, the next question would be, how do we solve that? And Joe, you can take it from there. Like if you do discover that you have, in many senses, a cybersecurity program that is failing, like where do you go from there?
I think starting from the top, right? So one thing that we've touched upon a couple times now is the lack of executive support and the lack of the enforced governance, right? I think getting secured C-level endorsement for what you're trying to accomplish from a cyber or security program perspective. Sort of tacking onto that, though, is the definition of roles. Des brought up the org chart before, and how a lot of organizations sort of just see that as something that's there, right? But with those definition of roles, we have an understanding of how our cybersecurity program is going to function. Without that, everybody is going to look at your security team as a siloed team of, there's these crazy nerds that are just doing what they do, right? And if you think about it, you look at organizations, a lot of them do look at the security and IT teams as just that, but they need to be sort of engrossed into the overall culture of the organization. Another big part of that too is we're thinking about, okay, we need to bring the business aspect of it into the security aspect of it. I think KPIs in general should be tied to your risk resilience, right? That's something that we don't see that often. But from a business metrics perspective, why not have your KPIs tied to how well you're functioning from a security perspective, right? Because those breaches, that compromise of it all is a reality, right? And for people who are worried about the secure income, the secure revenue, right? Well, that's being achieved most of the time through your security team, and I think those KPIs should be tied in there. I'll leave it there.
I would say, adding on to that point, if you're actually trying to fix the security program, number one, you have to highlight that you actually know that you have a problem. That's the first one. Most times, I think that everyone goes through thinking that they're in a place that they're really not in. They think like, hey, yeah, we hit this metric. Hey, we hit this thing here. Yeah, we're good to go. Hey, we haven't been breached. Hey, we haven't had anything material. Number one, you should always assume, in my philosophy, is you should always assume compromise. Assume that you're already under the gun. Assume that someone's already in. Assume that it's already broken. And then from there, that's how you find opportunities to innovate and to find ways to scale and actually have consumable solutions that you can implement into technological workflows and business processes specifically. So the first one is tell yourself the truth, understand that you have a problem. From there, you go and you move into governance. And governance starts off with your program charter, starts off with your 5-year plan, and then it's everything else that you need to hit after that to actually be successful. You need to take all of your policy standards, you need to make sure that they are, number one, not just administrative, but they are actual true technical controls. So you need to implement the things that's in those policies with technical controls and not administrative controls, if at all possible. Because technical controls are hard blockers, they're enforceable right then and there. Boom, you kill all other issues that you have from I didn't feel like it or from people circumventing your controls. Also from there, once you've accomplished that, right, or let's assume that you get to that point, we could kind of start talking about some of the nuances that you need to hit from there. I think that you then have to start to look at security, and you have to approach it at that governance step as actually being another business vertical, running it like finance, running it like legal, running it like, you know what I mean, operations. You need to run security the same exact way. Technology as a whole has struggled with this, in that technology, you know, gets their directives from the business and goes on from there, but sometimes losing focus, trying to focus on certain features and certain things that they want to bring to market because they want to innovate, right? And they want to find those cool opportunities, and they can miss the entire point of what the business is trying to accomplish. Security, falling down that rung, has done even poorer job at it, in that what do the business actually want to see? What security program do they actually want? How do they measure that as being successful? And we know that one of the things that they want is, we want security, number one, obviously we want the business to be protected, but we also want to be enabled by it, where we want to be able to ideally see a return on investment. How do you see a return on investment if you don't have metrics around it and what success looks like? And that success should be built upon industry best practice, but it should also be built off of what the business is actually trying to accomplish. How are we helping to bring things into the ecosystem, right? How are we, bringing that additional peace of mind, that additional trust, clarity to our customers, to our clients, to our team members, right? Where they feel safe and secure to continue to do business, right? These are other things that we have to highlight as well. And so I think that when you look at this holistically as a problem, how many people are honestly saying, hey, I know we have a problem. I know we haven't done any of these things. Hey, I know we don't have a foundation. That's the first thing that you need to hit, and then you can start building everything on top of it from there. But you have to have the strategic vision to do it, and then you have to start really implementing the things and the best practices to put yourself in position to be successful.
And then once it's implemented, continuity, right? We
Yes.
continue with our program. I obviously compliance a lot of times is a checkbox activity, right? But just because you got your program up and running, just because it's, even if the best case scenario, it becomes a functioning business vertical, and we have KPIs attached to it, the continuity of that practice is just as important, right? Just because we have everything in place now doesn't mean we could just let it go, right? And that's a lot of times we're seeing these security programs just being let go, right? It's almost like from a health perspective, right? Just letting your body go, it's the same thing. That continuity is so important in making sure that, one, think about it, if we're thinking about it as another business vertical, well, your HR teams are always getting, retooled and bolstered. Your finance teams, of course, are getting retooled all the time, more efficient workflows. Well, that should be the same thing for your cybersecurity teams as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously I can't get into like technical weeds, but I think the only thing that I would add is that if you don't have a end goal that's probably based on continuity when it comes to cybersecurity, so not just a goal of, hey, I want to get to this objective, but I want to get to this objective that I can maintain. If you haven't clearly defined that, you're ultimately like, Christopher Columbus, like going across the ocean without a destination. And so in many senses, you're failing. So I think from my perspective, if you literally just have that in place, you're probably 3-4 times higher than other people in your space by just having a strategy and a desired outcome. So anyway, what do you guys think?
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Yeah. So that's I think the last topic for today. Do you guys want to talk about anything else before we close it out?
Thanks for listening.
Good to go.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.